If you've done some exploration into Buddhist teachings, you may have heard the phrases Buddha nature or Buddha mind. But what do these phrases mean anyway? Is a Buddha mind different than an ordinary person's mind? And what does Buddha nature have anything to do with dealing with the stress and troubles in our lives? If you're interested, keep watching. So let's first do some review. Buddha Dharma is the teaching of the Buddha and all of the people generations after him in the various lineages of Buddhism. These teachings are instructions for how to live wakefully. These teachings, when we practice them, they help us to become wiser so that we can deal with situations in our life more skillfully and we can be more compassionate to other people and help them resolve their difficulties and find freedom. And on this path of practice, it's most important that we first understand how we are not wakeful, how we are not wise. We first face our suffering and we take a look at its cause. We also have confidence or faith that it can cease. We can resolve our troubles. And we come to know more and more the path of practice and how to go about embarking on it. And as I mentioned in the other videos of this series, the most core teaching of Buddhism, no matter what tradition, no matter what lineage, is dependent origination. The Chinese is 缘起. Dependent origination is the conditioned arising of our suffering, as well as the conditioned cessation of our suffering. This is the most central teaching in all of Buddhism. And there's a saying from the discourses of the Buddha compiled in the Agamas, or Ahanjing, which says, if we can see dependent origination, we see the Dharma. If we see the Dharma, we see the Buddha. This doesn't refer to seeing with our eyes, but it refers to experiencing. If we can experience the dependent origination and cessation of our suffering, we understand all of the Buddha's teachings and we understand the reality of our human nature. When we experience that, we experience Buddha. Not some Buddha outside of us, but our own Buddha nature. But this may be the first time you're hearing the term Buddha nature. In the previous two videos in the series, I used the term emptiness to describe the nature of ourselves and the world. And in the first video on emptiness, we introduced the system of teachings which is referred to as the empty nature mere name system, or the 性空唯名系. And as I mentioned, the systems of teaching in the Mahayana were categorized by many different teachers over the generations. This categorization has been done by Master Yin Shun, or Yin Shun Dao Shi. In this system of teaching, emptiness is approached or elaborated in terms of logic. Here, everything is just described as dependently arising on many different causes and conditions. This logical, dialectic approach, conversational approach, is often used in the Prajna Sutras as well as the teachings of Nagarjuna. This is where the method of dialogue is a process of negation, negating the self-nature of things, until eventually one comes to an understanding of emptiness. In the second video on consciousness, here I introduced the system of false imagination mere consciousness, or 虚妄伪实系. This system approaches dependent origination by analyzing the functions of our consciousness, and specifically looks at how the functions of consciousness either create an experience of delusion and suffering, or how consciousness can be transformed so that our experience is that of wisdom and clarity, seeing things as they are. And in this system, it also talks about emptiness because it points out that even those functions of mind, even those aspects of consciousness, are empty themselves of any permanent self-nature. And now in this video, I'll speak about the third system of Mahayana teaching, as Master Yin Shuen categorized it, the truly eternal mere mind system, which approaches the understanding of dependent origination based on the true mind. Here it goes on to explain that suffering and all phenomena are empty. However, we have this most essential quality of mind that is true and real, and that both suffering and nirvana, or freedom from suffering, arise from this true nature. This approach to emptiness or wisdom doesn't rely heavily on logic or analysis, but actually relies more on faith. One of the earliest expressions of what we're now calling Buddha nature is what's called Tathagatagarbha, or the womb of the Buddha, or the embryonic Buddha. Some scholars conclude that the Tathagatagarbha teachings were written probably by Chinese authors rather than from Indian authors. However, it's accepted that some of the most core teachings on Tathagatagarbha, which I'll just refer to as Buddha nature, were composed in India and were part of Indian Buddhism before it expanded and was brought into other countries like China, Japan, Korea, etc. This school of thought was present in India in the 3rd century, and we have some Sanskrit texts that were dated to be around that time. Most important thing that I'd like to emphasize is that it's not important actually who wrote these teachings, but what's most important is its message and how it can help us. But for your own reference, if you'd like to look into the original sources of what I'm going to speak about today, you could look into the Buddha Womb Sutra, or Rulai Zang Jing, or the Lankavatara Sutra, or Leng Qie Jing, the Great Final Nirvana Sutra, or Da Niepan Jing, as well as the Lion's Roar of Queen Srimala, the Shengman Jing. There's also a sutra that became very popular within Chinese Buddhism, especially within the Chan and Zen schools, which is called the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, or Yuanjue Jing. And if you're interested, there's a commentary on the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment done by my late teacher, Master Shengyan. And for those of you who understand Chinese, there's also a series of lectures that were given many years ago to the monastics of Dharma Drum Mountain, where Master Shengyan expounded upon in great detail the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment. And there is also a very important treatise within the Chinese Buddhist tradition, which has influenced many of the schools, called The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana, or Da Sheng Qi Xin Lun. And I'll put some links in the description for your reference. Now, when we explore this teaching on Buddha nature, it's important to understand the context. Firstly, it's important to know that Indian Buddhism has a strong tradition of logic, analysis, and debate. However, not everyone is suited to these approaches of using logic or analysis. And for those people who don't really have that tendency to analyze, they probably wouldn't resonate with the consciousness-only teachings. For those people who are not very keen with logic or dialectic, then they probably wouldn't resonate with the emptiness school or Nagarjuna's teachings. And some people may be afraid when they hear the word emptiness, because if we don't understand emptiness correctly, and we just hear that everything is empty, everything is lacking any self-nature, some people hear that and they just think that it means nothingness. They think it means that the purpose of Buddhist practice is to get to a state of nothingness, or to even attempt to escape life, or that death is a better option. Some kind of permanent death is a better option than living and dealing with suffering. The Buddha saw that people had this fear. They had this fear and misunderstanding of emptiness and non-existence. And so that's why the Buddha spoke of the Tathagatagarbha, or the womb of the Buddha, that everyone has within themselves this Buddha nature. It's a very positive message compared to the negative message of emptiness. The approach of negation may make people feel like there's just nothing left, nothing to grab onto. Can be scary. Whereas the teaching of Buddha nature gives a person a sense that there's something very positive and affirmative there. There's something to hold on to. The Buddha was also addressing people who had faith in theistic religions or faith in some sort of eternal self, whether this eternal self existed outside of their body and mind, a Brahma, or whether there was some sort of self existing within their body and mind, this Atman. There were other theories of reality which described everything as empty, but that there was some permanent underlying being in the backdrop of phenomena. So if you could get in touch with that being, then you would be free. The teaching on Buddha nature seems quite similar to that and could be misunderstood as being a theistic form of Buddhism, but it's not, as I'll explain. This teaching was just more appropriate for people who have a tendency to want to rely on something greater than themselves. This kind of person has a stronger affinity with faith, a belief in a greater power. And these very same people would often ask the question, if everything is empty and doesn't have any fixed nature or permanent self, then who is enlightened? Who becomes free from suffering? Or who is aware of the empty nature of phenomena? The answer is Buddha nature. To define Buddha nature, we can say that it's the inherent and pure nature of the mind. Chinese is 本性清净. So what does that mean exactly? The inherent mind is often synonymous with Buddha mind or true mind. True mind is relative to the false mind. The true mind is something which doesn't change. The false mind is the changing phenomena of the mind, thoughts, feelings, any kind of form or experience. In the treatise called The Awakening of Faith, or Qixin Lun, it describes the mind as having these two aspects. The true aspect of the mind, or the 真如心, it has no form, it has no image, and it can't be grasped. And the false mind, or the 生灭心, the arising, ceasing mind, refers to all of the passing thoughts that go through our mind that have form, that can be observed or can be grasped. And it said that from this true mind or from this Buddha nature, all kinds of wholesome and unwholesome phenomena arise. Unwholesome phenomena refer to our suffering, all of our experience that comes about because of attachment to views and craving or aversion, anxiety, stress, jealousy, all of these problematic phenomena of mind we refer to as unwholesome. Wholesome phenomena refer to the absence of craving, the absence of aversion and attachment to views. They also refer to wisdom and compassion, the qualities of a wakeful mind. So, in this system of thought, essentially, suffering arises and ceases based on Buddha nature or true mind. So, from this perspective, when our mind is in accord with pollutants, so to speak, pollutants referring to our attachment to the particles of the mind, our thoughts. When our mind is in accord with these pollutants attached to all kinds of thoughts which lead to rigid views, craving, and aversion, then suffering arises. When our mind accords with purity, then it's not attached to these thoughts. It's not attached to any pollutants in the mind, and suffering ceases. Wisdom arises. And it said that our Buddha nature contains all of the virtuous merit of all the Buddhas. referring to all the virtuous qualities of an awakened being, such as wisdom, compassion, and all of these different skillful means of interacting with other people that help relieve their suffering. On all these qualities of an awakened mind, it's often described as vast treasure or vast store of treasure that's within us, but we just don't know it. It's almost like if we had a treasure chest in the basement of our house, but we had no idea it was there. But it's filled with all of these riches, which we could live our whole life based upon these treasures and not have to worry about anything. But how come we don't even know our Buddha mind? How come we don't even know our true mind? And the reason is because it's concealed. It's concealed because of all of our delusive thinking, as it's called, 妄念, 妄想, which refers to our attachment to all the passing thoughts in our mind. When we lack awareness, our mind is constantly thinking, constantly grasping at images and ideas, but we don't even know it. And there's so much of this delusive thinking that it completely covers the natural spaciousness of our mind. And it's analogous to the sky being completely covered by clouds. We know the sky is there, but we can't see it at all. In our personal life experience, maybe you found yourself at one point in time ruminating about how your life is terrible. You may feel that so many things are going wrong, not only in your personal life, but in the world. It just seems like the whole world is terrible. The whole world is doomed. No matter what we look at, no matter what we see or hear or feel, we just feel misery. And we may feel deeply depressed. This is because the sky of our mind is covered in so many clouds of depressive thinking. But at some point, we may have the question, what is Buddha nature really? Is it a thing? What's the difference between Buddha nature and the idea of some great self? It's important to remember that Buddha nature is not a thing. It has no form, it has no shape. And in the Shurangama Sutra, there is a very popular interaction between the Buddha and his disciple Ananda, where Ananda asks, "Where is my mind? Where can we find this mind?" And the Buddha asked him many different questions to reveal that this mind has no location because it's not a thing. It's not inside of us. If it was inside of us, then how could it contact the outside? If the mind is outside of us, how could we know ourselves? Is it somewhere in between? If the mind was in between, then how could there be any connection between inside and outside? And the Buddha continuously questioned Ananda, until it was naturally clear that the mind doesn't have any location. The mind, or our true mind, is not a thing. And our true mind or Buddha nature is also not a creator. It's different than theistic ideas of God, God being a creator of the universe, a creator of phenomena. Buddha nature is not a creator in opposition to its creation. Buddha nature, or the true nature of our mind, is just the capacity to be awake and aware, the capacity to be conscious. So it's a function. It's not a being. It's nothing that can be grasped. In the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, it says it can't be defined in terms of existence, existing, being something, or non existence, that there's nothing. And it's kind of like the sky, which it's not a thing, is it? We have a name for the sky, but can you grasp it? Can you grab hold of the sky? Clouds can float through the sky, planes, birds, and we can walk through space, but it's not a thing. It's not graspable. Buddha nature is somewhat like this. Buddha nature is affirming, whereas emptiness negates things. Emptiness negates that there is any kind of permanent independent thing anywhere. It doesn't negate all phenomena. It just negates permanence. It negates independence. Buddha nature affirms that although emptiness is the reality of things, there is still this capacity for awareness. So even though we are empty, us so-called ordinary folks, as well as Buddhas, are all empty, but we all have this great capacity for wisdom and compassion and engaging with the world in a skillful way. And Buddha nature points out that it's our very own mind that is not only the source of suffering, but is the source of freedom. We don't need to look for nirvana, freedom from suffering, somewhere else. We don't need to look for it after this life or some place else or in some sort of state outside of our typical state of being. But that nirvana is actually the basic nature of our mind. So that's why in the Mahayana, it describes Buddha nature in a way which is quite interesting and quite the opposite of the way things are spoken of in the agamas, or the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. Buddha nature is described as permanent, chang. It's described as joyful, or le. It's described as self, or wo. And it's also described as pure, purity, jing. Why is our Buddha nature permanent? Well, because it's always available. It's always functioning. Our capacity to be awake and aware, it's always functioning. It's just that it may be covered over, or it may be obstructed by all of our attachments. But our capacity to be wakeful is always there, just like the sky is always there, even though the clouds are passing by. Why is our Buddha nature joyful? Well, when we realize this nature of our mind, very naturally, there's joy there. We don't need to create joy somehow, or build up joy, or try to be joyful. And this joy doesn't come and go. It's not the joyfulness of being excited because something happens. This joyfulness is the essential quality of our mind. Why is it described as self? Well, because this nature of mind doesn't depend on anything. It's completely independent. It doesn't matter if our body is healthy or ill. It doesn't matter if our feelings are agitated or calm. It doesn't matter if there are lots of thoughts, busyness in our mind. It doesn't matter. Our nature doesn't depend on any of these things. And it doesn't come about because of a certain time period of practice. We don't have to practice for a certain amount of time and accumulate enough of something so that our mind is free. Buddha nature is not an accumulation of anything. So it's said it's self-existent. Why is our Buddha nature described as pure? Because it can't be damaged. Just like the sky can't be burned with a torch, our mind, our nature of mind, can't be harmed by our suffering. It can't be damaged even by some sort of traumatic event or life trauma. We may feel that our body is damaged, our emotional state, and the quality of our thoughts may feel like they're damaged. But from this perspective of Buddha nature, we always have the capacity for wakefulness. And if we can see that all of these results of our traumatic experience are just passing thoughts, passing feelings, we can still be free. We can still experience unconditional joy, unconditional sense of freedom. Even though we may suffer a lot in our lives, we're never permanently damaged. For those of you who are more familiar with the foundational teachings of Buddhism, you may notice that these four are quite the opposite of what the Buddha taught when he spoke of impurity, suffering, impermanence, and no self or selflessness. But it's important to know that when the Buddha spoke of impurity, he was speaking of the body, the phenomena of the body. When he was speaking of suffering, he was speaking of the quality of feelings, that feelings can ultimately never be satisfying. When he spoke of impermanence, he was referring to our mind. Our state of mind is constantly changing. The phenomena of the mind, the clouds of the mind, are always coming and going. And selflessness points out that among all of these phenomena of body and mind, there's nothing that's permanently a self. There's nothing independent there that we can identify as me, as myself. So these teachings of Buddha nature are pointing at the nature of the mind, this capacity for wakefulness, whereas impurity, suffering, selflessness, and impermanence are referring to the qualities of phenomena. So just like we could describe the qualities of clouds as being impermanent, coming and going, and without any self-nature, the quality of the sky is just unchanging, always and everywhere the same, self-existent. And if we look deeply at the teachings of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of the Buddha, Buddha nature, we eventually can see that, as it said in the Lankavatara Sutra, Buddha nature, Tathagatagarbha, is just another name for emptiness. It says quite plainly that Tathagatagarbha is the empty nature of things. As I mentioned, emptiness just refers to the fact that everything everywhere is without any permanent fixed nature. A Buddha is someone who realizes the empty nature of their body, their feelings, their thoughts, all of their experiences, as well as the whole of the environment, as well as the whole of the cosmos, is empty of self, is empty of any permanence. And since all of us, all living beings, also have the capacity to realize emptiness, then we also have this Buddha nature. We all have the ability to awaken. Our nature is emptiness. Awareness of emptiness is Buddha. So our empty nature is Buddha nature. We're fully alive, empty of self, yet we can completely function, and function in a way which is wise and compassionate and responsive to the needs of others. But many people just think that, well, I'm just an ordinary being, just an ordinary person. I'm not a saint. I'm not a Buddha. I suffer a lot. And it's true that all of us, including myself, we often lack awareness, and that creates a lot of suffering for ourselves and others. When we lack awareness, we dwell in our thoughts. We dwell in what's called illusory thoughts or passing thoughts, 虚妄杂念. As long as we dwell in our thoughts and we're unaware of it, then we're just an ordinary being and we suffer. But we still have Buddha nature. Why? Because our suffering is empty. There's nothing permanent or fixed about suffering. If suffering is just this unawareness of our passing thoughts, being lost in, dwelling in these passing thoughts, then when we have awareness, we're actually free from those thoughts. Once we're aware of the empty nature of these passing thoughts, that not even one of those thoughts stays. The reason we feel like there's something on our mind is because we're constantly thinking in an unaware way. As soon as there is awareness of the nature of our thoughts being empty or passing, impermanent, then we are free from them. And since these thoughts are just passing, and our mind itself is empty, the true nature of our mind is not a thing, so actually these thoughts can't pollute our mind. These thoughts are not permanent damage or permanent pollutants in the mind. So in this sense, our mind is always pure. Because thoughts and attachment to them are empty, there's no way for the mind to be permanently damaged or permanently polluted. So can you see that? Since there is no concrete object called mind, whether it's passing thoughts or even Buddha mind is not a thing. So, thereby, our mind can't be permanently damaged. Our mind can't be scarred. Even though we may have these deep wounds, traumas that seem to be permanent, when we have awareness, those traumas or those deep wounds start to heal. Or more accurately, when we have awareness, those wounds or those images and thoughts that bring up so much powerful feeling and painful feeling, at that moment, they're no longer wounds. When we see those thoughts and impressions as empty, there's no pain in that moment. That's when we realize that our mind is pure and can't be damaged. So that's why it's said that our basic nature is pure, 本性清净. And that's where the saying in the Chan or Zen school came from, when Master Huineng said, there's not a single thing called mind which could be soiled by the dust of our afflictions or our delusive thinking. His elder brother in the Dharma wrote a poem which was talking about mind like a mirror. Mind is like a mirror where dust can land on it. And it's our practice to wipe the dust off the mirror. With this analogy, which is not bad, it makes it seem like our basic nature is a kind of a thing, the mirror itself. Master Huineng said, there's no mirror. There's no mirror itself for dust to land on. When we realize that the nature of our mind is empty, when our self is empty, when we realize that, there's no place for these attachments to land. There's no place for this illusory thinking to damage or soil. So in this way, because of the emptiness of the mind, because of our empty nature, then our nature is pure. So there's a saying in the Abhitamsaka Sutra, Buddhas, ordinary beings, and mind are all one. 心佛众生三无差别. So Buddhas are Buddhas because of mind, true mind, this capacity for awareness. Sentient beings are sentient beings because they're not aware of their true mind. They're not aware of their inherent capacity for wakefulness to the empty nature of things. So no matter if we're suffering or free from suffering, we all have Buddha nature, and all of our minds are pure, whether we're aware of it or not. So we can see that the teachings of Tathagatagarbha are a positive emphasis and an affirmation of the essential nature of our mind, this awareness which can't be soiled, which can't be polluted. And it emphasizes the functions of wisdom and compassion and how all of us have this capacity to be wise and to be there to support people in their suffering. So this is quite different if we contrast it with the teachings on consciousness, which have a lot of emphasis on the functions of the mind, especially of how the mind is impure, and that how only through the process of transformation can the mind eventually be pure with the experience or the realization of Buddhahood. In the Tathagatagarbha teachings, it doesn't matter if you're an ordinary being or a Buddha, your mind is always pure. So there are some differences in the ways that the various systems of thought present the Buddha's teaching. But I don't think it's too useful to get caught up in those minute details. And just remember that it's different ways to look at our mind and the process of practice. Buddha nature teachings are suitable for those who have strong faith. They have a tendency to believe that there is a greater power. And in this case, we all have this great power or great capacity to be free, to live in a free and easygoing way, which is not lazy, but which is wise and compassionate. So there's an important message here, which is especially when we find ourselves feeling like we're in the depths of misery, deep in depression. If we can see our attachment, and more concretely, if we can see our attachment to our thoughts and views, and if we can see that all of our views, all of our experiences and memories, and the things that we cling to dearly and identify with as ourself, my personality, who I am, if we can see that all of those things are just passing thoughts, empty, passing thoughts, and they're not ourself, we can experience our Buddha mind. We can experience our mind functioning in a way that is free. The moment that we catch ourselves ruminating, that very moment we can be free from rumination. And we always have this capacity for insight. And that's a very positive message, where if all of us could realize at this moment, or at the very moment that we're causing suffering, that we're causing trouble, that we're rigidly clinging onto our views, our desires, our dislikes, in that moment, we can release them. In that moment, our delusion, our confusion can stop. When our delusion and confusion stops, then all of our troublesome behavior stops. Then the most troublesome things in this world, like war and killing, can also stop. War, killing, human-created disasters only continue because of delusion, because the people engaging in the wars are unaware. With awareness, we can stop. We can encourage others to stop. There's a saying that stopping is awakening. 歇即菩提. Stopping our delusion, stopping all of our harmful behavior, that's awakening. And we can create a beautiful world if we have this awareness. So how do we know that any of this is true? Well, it requires faith. It requires a strong belief that the true nature of our mind is pure. It's unsoiled by any kind of pain and suffering, delusion, confusion, and that all of those things are just temporary phenomena. They're just temporary fixtures. If we believe that the nature of our mind is like the clear and vast open sky, and that all the problems we face are just like passing clouds, then we'll be motivated to practice. Practice helps us become aware of the passing nature of our suffering. And the practices based on this perspective of Buddha nature are often quite simple, in contrast to the practices of the consciousness-only school, or the practices of dialectic, or the practices of other traditions of Buddhism that use a lot of analysis and sequential approaches to training the mind and developing insight. Teachings on Buddha nature are based on faith. Faith that our nature is pure, and a simple awareness of the empty nature of our passing thoughts, the empty nature of all of our attachments and problematic thinking. There's no need for excessive exercises in logic. There's no need for detailed and complicated approaches via analysis. We just have faith and awareness. So, in conclusion, Buddha nature affirms our capacity for wakefulness and freedom. It still recognizes that our body, feelings, thoughts, and all the phenomena in the world are empty, empty of self, empty of permanence, and that we should be careful not to attach to these things, careful not to attach to our own thoughts, get lost in them, dwelling in them. And with this capacity for wakefulness, with awareness of the emptiness of ourselves, then we are free. In that moment, we are free. When we experience the emptiness of ourself and the world, we experience the purity of our mind. But are you curious? How do we actually do it? It doesn't sound like you have to do much. How do we actually apply this approach? And how long does it take? What are some of these methods that can help us realize our Buddha nature? In the next video, I'd like to share the teachings of Chan and Zen Buddhism and how Chan Buddhism crystallizes these three systems of thought into a very simple and practical approach to Buddhist practice.